Hello, everyone, and welcome to our October ARCS chat. My name is Robin Bauer-Kilgo. I am the Association Manager for ARCS, and I'm going to go through a couple of quick technical and programming notes before we start our chat. For programming notes, we do have an upcoming webinar for ARCS on November 4th called Database Blues, all about CMSs or content management systems. So if you're interested in that, go over onto arcsinfo.org to registrar. It is $25 for members and $35 for non-members to access the webinar. Should be really fun, about an hour and a half of your time on November 4th. Also, as a quick note, if you're an active member of ARCS, you can actually enter to win a free webinar registration. If you're interested in that, just email me at info@arcsinfo.org and I can get you instructions on how to do that. Essentially, you're going to be updating your membership profile for me in order to try to win a free webinar registration. Finally, a couple of quick tech notes. The platform we're using is a slight delay as we push it out to YouTube. So if you have a question for any of our panelists, just know that we'll see it. We'll get to it eventually. Same goes for the chat. We will be keeping an eye on that the entire time. So if you have a question for anyone, please do feel free to put it in the chat and we'll make sure to keep track of it. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to John Robinette.
Hello, hello, hello. This is John, and I was about to say good morning, but that's only for the people on the West Coast. Good afternoon, and welcome to the second chat of this new season. Today, we're going to continue with our loose theme for the season of career advocacy. And as you may have read in our description, so the idea here is that we're going to feature this new series called Career Perspectives and examine the careers of our colleagues. And the point of view is sometimes in order to progress in our own careers, maybe we need to better understand the careers and the trajectories of our own colleagues. And I don't know about you, but I've had many times where I actually, I'll meet somebody new and then I find out that they used to be a lawyer. They used to be, maybe a cop or something in their past. And it's like, wow, how did you get to where you are now? Or just learning all of the amazing stories that maybe people that you look up to have experienced in their own careers. So with that, we're going to start with the first of our series, which is the mid-career perspective of the profession. So the idea, let's see how their past and their trajectory can help us along in our own journey. So what's interesting about the mid-career perspective is that oftentimes people at this point in their career have some authority. They have a position of power, hopefully. And so what we want to do is look at where they came from and what their expectations when they started were, but also examine what the future holds exactly, because they're now in a position to really affect the future and inform the future. So and also in a position to even mentor. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and introduce our panel. Joining us today, Kaia Black, the Special Projects and Programs Manager at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. We also have Jen Keynes, Head of Collection Services at the Royal Armories in Leeds in the UK. And then lastly, but not leastly, Chiquita Santiago, Chief Registrar at the Museum of History, Anthropology, and Art at the University of Puerto Rico, San Juan. So welcome everybody. To get started, I do want to, we do have to get this first question out of the way. Let's talk about our educational backgrounds, just so that we can have sort of a platform from which to jump off. So Kaia, tell us about how you got involved in working in this museum world.
Hi, John. Thank you for having me today.
Of course.
Yes, so I basically attended Howard University in Washington, D.C., where I got my Bachelor of Arts in History. I minored in art history, and I went on to get my Master's of Arts in Museum Studies from Seton Hall University in New Jersey.
Fantastic. Jen, how about you? What's going on in the UK? How do you get into this?
Well, I kind of fell into museum work, but my during my first degree, which is I have a Bachelor of Science in Geology, and at the University of Birmingham, where I studied geology, there was a museum, and I think my then tutor recognised some kind of skill set in me that meant that I went from there to study at the University of East Anglia. So I have a master's in museum studies, museology we call it sometimes in the UK. And then since then I have done a couple of diplomas in art law with the Institute of Art and Law. So that's my kind of educational background.
Exactly the non-linear trajectory that we were discussing. So, and lastly, Chiquita. Oh, mute, please.
Hi. Hi. Well, my bachelor's degree are in fine arts. As my background is in drawing and printmaking. Then I do my minor in art history, which I take to kind of volunteering in the museum. And it's like, it's cool to work in a museum. Then I work to do my master's in public affairs with specialization in art administration, which I took further to collection management. And so, because here the museum in Puerto Rico, there were very little registers. So it's like, what is that? And all that kind. So people was, looking for good people with good tendency in organizing. So it's like, okay, this is a good way to go. So those are the beginnings of the, then I get to internship at Museum of Modern Art in New York for 2 years when they were doing the move from Queens to New York. So that was my registration, full training for 2 years.
Okay. So I do want to take a quick moment to actually define mid-career, because I feel like I should have done that earlier. For our purposes today, we're essentially looking at someone who's got, this is of course a very non-scientific definition, but essentially someone who's got a decade or more of experience, probably closer to 15 or 20 years of experience in the field, and their initial trajectory was towards the registrar position. So yeah, essentially someone who now is fundamentally in the midst of in the middle range of a potentially 40-year career. So that's where we are. So transitioning from the university question, like you mentioned, Chiquita, you had an internship. Did anyone else follow an internship model in terms of getting their first experiences? Jen, you're saying no. Talk to me.
No, I went straight from my master's degree to a job. My first job coming out from doing a geology degree, my first job was as registrar and natural science officer for a local authority, local government museum here in the UK. And it's at that point where I got the job because I was a geologist and working with natural science collections as a whole, but I kind of then realized that actually the registrar bit of that sort of two-tier job was the thing that actually I was probably best at, and I really liked in terms of the logistics and project management and that kind of broad scope of actually you get to work with lots of different collections, and that's what actually kind of really appealed to me. So that's kind of when I started thinking, oh, there's this thing called registrars and collections management, and that's really interesting, and I could do that. So that was where I'd sort of started from. And
so Kaia, I want to ask you the same question, and also like how you got into the registrar field, but we also, we can see that you're not technically a registrar now. So we'll get to all of those questions, but yeah, did you have an internship, and is that how you got into being a registrar?
Yeah, so essentially while I was working on my master's, one of my professors was Rebecca Buck, who I think everyone on the panel is probably familiar with. She wrote registration methods in addition to countless other books with Jean Gilmore. But not only was Rebecca one of my professors, I did a dual track of museum registration and museum education. But at any rate, she actually gave me my first internship that I had in graduate school, working at the Newark Museum. And basically, I was performing inventory work on the museum's collection. So that was my first internship. And after that, I had went on when I was working on my master's thesis. I had an internship at the Studio Museum in Harlem in New York, where I worked in the curatorial department.
Yeah. And then from there, did you continue to progress as a registrar?
Yes, I actually have 13 years experience as a registrar. I've worked in a museum setting. I worked for the Guggenheim Museum where I traveled exhibitions. I also worked at Pace Gallery for a few years, and I also manage a private art collection in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow. Wow. And so I do want to discuss your transition out of being a registrar, which I think is a fascinating thing. But I do want to ask both Jen and Chiquita. Chiquita, how did you get into your current role? Like, how many other registrar jobs did you have before you got there, and how long have you been doing what you're doing?
Well, this is very interesting because when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I was like a volunteer work at the museum at the university, which I work now. And then the director, the curator at that time, she was like, "Oh, I like how you work. You are very organized. You know, there's something where the museum work called registrar." So Chica was kind of my mentor. I know she's hearing from the next office, but she was kind of my mentor. So like you can look forward to, because when you are mid-class in Puerto Rico, you have to go through everything I have to grab here in the island. So I was learning everything and also research abroad because I would love to study abroad, but I do everything here in the island. And so then when I get the opportunity to look forward to have applied many internships available, at least I get the one I wanted. So that prepared me to finish. And when that happened, sadly, was in the midst of 9/11. So it was really hard to be in New York at that time. And so I came back, and at the same museum, I was doing my internship as my volunteer work as a museum, which I work now. So I've been here already 16 years. Because they were looking for somebody to be a registrar because the museum was the beginning the stages of the accreditation for AAM. So my first registration as my first registered work as a registrar was preparing the museum for the accreditation. So it was like full blast. So you have writing the policies and writing the plans and doing everything and checking. So it's like a very hardcore course crash as a registrar. So, and I have stayed here. We work with another museum as a consultant, but I always have been here at the University of Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Well, and what a place to learn, because the scope of the collection is history, anthropology, and art. And I mean, it's a huge range of technical abilities to learn and mediums to learn. So
yeah. Archaeology is a whole nother world. I wish the best, and I admire all the people who go for archaeology work, but that was like, oh, this is something that I have to learn. So as a registrar, you always have to be learning something.
Yeah.
And for me, that was the first thing that I had to tackle head on when I started here at the job.
Yeah. Now, Jen, how did you get to where you are? Did you ever practice law? Or what was your career path after working in a geology collection?
So after sort of being a registrar and natural science officer, I moved then very much into registrar for National Museums Liverpool. So I moved from local authority into nationals, and then I've also worked back in local authority, so local government collections, independent and nationals. So I've been currently at Royal Armouries. So Royal Armouries is the National Museum of Arms and Armour here in the UK. I've been working as their head of collection services for 2 years now. So I look after not only the registrar's team, but also the conservation departments, archives, libraries, display techs. So it's quite a broad spectrum. My previous role, I was there for 13 years and I was registrar and collections manager there. So that was a local authority, a local government organisation which had all sorts of different collections, from country houses to historic scheduled monuments and large natural science collections and everything in between. So I've worked in a variety of different collection types, and it's really that sort of registration collections management that I've kind of specialised in. While I've been working in roles across the some nearly 25 years now since I've been working as a registrar, I did the 2 diplomas in art law, and those have been really useful, and they're some of the best things I've done actually with the Institute of Art and Law here in the UK. They are really good because registration world has moved as I've kind of moved through the career in the 25 years I've been working in the sector. It's become much more legal, especially here in the UK, and that kind of legal background and knowledge is kind of really important, I think, for us as registrars.
Right. I mean, everything's a contract these days, so even the most basic things. So I wanted to ask, is there a mentor type system in the UK, or maybe it's not so structured, but is it a common practice?
So when I first started, there definitely wasn't a kind of mentor system. I was really lucky because when I worked for National Museums Liverpool, there were other registrars who worked not necessarily in my museum, the World Museum, but other registrars around, and some of those were very experienced registrars. So I was really lucky because I had the kind of informal mentoring, and also the UK registrars group is just so good in terms of that network. I'm sure it's the same with ARCS, that network and kind of informal mentoring. So whilst you may not know the answer to something, you know somebody who might know the answer to something. So at least you can kind of ring them and kind of talk through those issues. I think the UK registrars group are trying to set up a kind of mentoring scheme. There is the Museums Association here in the UK do a kind of mentoring scheme and a kind of as part of their associateship, and I'm a mentor for that scheme, and have mentored very much kind of collections managers, registrars, or people who've wanted to be in that field through that scheme. But it's kind of a bit more, it's not formal in that sense, I think, here in the UK.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting that that basically everyone here has had a formative person to usher them into, I don't know whether it's into the career, but they certainly gave them opportunities and gave them a what am I saying? A basic understanding of the career, and helped everyone develop a baseline knowledge of registration. So that's an interesting point, especially as we consider, say the UK Registrar Group and ARC's own mentorship programs. Robin, do we have any questions from our chat?
We do. One's just more of a comment, which is there, when it comes to the definition of being a mid-career, is there any other field where up to 20 years of experience is considered mid-career? I was Googling it. I responded back saying, like, I'm trying to Google it and I'm finding like all over the place definitions of it. And I think that really boils down to, the definitions of what we consider a career as, probably, if I'm guessing of this group, late Gen Xers, early millennials is different than what, traditional career if you worked in the same place for however long your entire life. So I think that's an interesting point. And then someone else brought up, and this is one of the grand fabulous people of our profession, John Simmons, would like to know when each of the panelists became interested in working in a museum. At what point in their lives they realized that this was an option to get a job within the museum field? I know for me personally, I didn't go to museums as a kid. That was like more of a, as I went into middle school and high school, I started realizing museums. And even then, I didn't realize this was a job field until I was firmly in college. So I think we'd be interested to kind of hear that from everyone right now.
Yeah. Who wants to field that first?
I'll go if you like.
Go ahead.
So I used to go to museums when I was very little. One of my kind of earliest memories is probably visiting the Science Museum in London and being able to push all the buttons and being very excited and giddy about that. I think absolutely not knowing, but not realizing that actually there was this thing called a museum and there was a profession that you could work in them. That was just something that just wasn't, I didn't know about until I went to university. And as I say, my then university had a geology museum, the Lapworth Museum in University of Birmingham, which is the most amazing geology collection. And it was only at that point where I thought, oh, actually, there's this thing called museums and maybe I could work in it. And it's full of amazing things. And yeah, that maybe I could do that.
Oh, you're a lifer. How about you, Kaia?
Yes, like Jen, I would say that I grew up as a child going to museums. My mother instilled the importance of history, preserving history and culture. So I think for me, I was always drawn to that. I'm a visual person. I'm an artist myself. I make jewelry. So I think for me, it was just like a natural segue just in terms of my interest. And I was lucky enough to come from a family of graphic designers and artists. So I think in that way, it just was a natural fit for me.
Yeah. Shakira?
Well, for me, my mother was a teacher. So for math and science, I went the whole opposite. I always like to draw, and I always see myself as an artist. But since I was going to the university to go to architecture. I got accepted my first semester. I was like so happy because I realized this is not what I wanted. Because they always tell you have to work here in Puerto Rico, and maybe it's something more global. So you have to be a doctor or an engineer, or so. Why are you going to do into the arts? You are going to, you're going to starve for the rest of your life, and so kind of thing. So very cultural. So don't worry, I will make my way. Is when I was here at the university, which I doing my volunteer. I always be a volunteer in a lot of things. And since the museum was looking for a volunteer, then I realized, oh, I get to see something in the backstage, because you always see the galleries, you always see the exhibitions, and you see everything so pretty, so neat. And I was wondering who do that and why they do that. And so that's a science to me. And that's what it tell me and make me start asking what I have to do to work in a museum, what I have to learn, what I have to study, because here I don't have a museum study background. I went to printmaking and drawing to administration as a master's. So I have to weigh my way in between. So museums, I always been a curious person. So I always like to travel and have my own things. So it's like something have to be within you to go in the museum also.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how often it is the case that people find themselves in a registrar position and they never intended to be there. They certainly, I got an art history degree, but, I didn't know registrar was an option. And I think it's a very common thing, perhaps, of our generation. I'd probably consider myself mid-career as well. So I think that, when we maybe do our EMP version of this chat, I mean, I think we'll see a different, just a hypothesis, a different knowledge about what the job options are in the career field. But you know, someone like maybe Kaia, you know, who had access to like one of the titans of the field at a younger age, maybe it was a little bit more apparent to you. So I do want to make a mention, like, you know, in the people that are following along in the live chat, please, you know, if you started your career in something other than as a registrar, let us know. Type it into the chat. I'm curious to see what everyone's background is, because you know, we know that the ladder to climb for this profession is not always a straight one. So, and it's not always clear which ladder to climb. So, with that in mind, I do want to talk about maybe some of the challenges that people had as they came up, and you know, I do want to. I'll start with Kaia regarding this, because, you know, as most people know who work in the museum field, it's a notoriously undiverse field. So what's your experience progressing in the museum world as a Black woman in the United States? This is, you know, it's a very difficult subject to talk about, but it's one that I think needs to be addressed.
Yes, I agree with that, John. I mean, I think it's interesting just in terms of my experiences. I think we were, you know, we kind of touched on this idea of mentorships and having a network. And I have to say, most likely, I have to give credit to those people who helped guide me, and they were supportive of my career and the work that I was doing. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I would have been afforded some of the opportunities that I have had come my way. I will admit that initially, graduating from college with a history degree, a liberal arts degree with a minor in art history, it was tough. It was tough even finding a regular job. Whereas a lot of my friends that majored in marketing or other types of business degrees, they easily got jobs like that. And I'm not even talking about like the job market now. This was probably about 20 years ago. But I think with the network that I did have, particularly the network that I built up when I was getting my master's, definitely helped me find access to positions that were available, and kind of laid the groundwork for me to prove myself. And I will say that it is so important these days with these DEAI initiatives to really work towards diversifying boards and diversifying our staffs, and also maybe creating mentorship programs for young adults of color who are not even familiar about you know, museum professions and being a registrar. I think a lot of times people just assume that you work in a museum, you're a curator, but there's so many other professions within the field that are available that people can, you know, kind of get their foot into the door. So, I mean, I think across the board, we all have a lot of work to do. Just, you know, spreading awareness, ensuring that we, you know, we mentor people, we show them the way, we give them guidance, we help them set goals. And I was lucky enough to have that in my corner.
Yeah. Chiquita, you're obviously you live you're part of the United States, but you are Latina. You are in a you know, essentially a Latina, I don't know what you call it, part of the United States. But I mean, was working in another part of the U.S. ever an option to you? And did you ever feel disadvantaged by being from Puerto Rico?
Well, if that happened, I didn't know, because something when you apply for a job, which I have done at some point in my career, to go forward of, to see another things, you don't get a response. Why don't you get moved forward in the recruitment area? That would happen, in all the jobs. So it was something about race, or it wasn't that obvious. Of course, about for experience, of course, I'm going to have less, because it's another chemistry between the registrar here in Puerto Rico. We don't have a lot of outgoing loans or something, but we have another experience in other areas. So which I realize I take on, so to make more and more studies and more serious in that part, especially, for in the emergency preparedness area for obvious reasons. But the thing is, when I go to United States, I always present myself as a Puerto Rican. I don't have problem to talk with my accents. I do because I know that I hope that everything see you as a colleague, as a person of other race who is a registrar. It's always the point of view which you have to also change. So you see a colleague, but she's working there. So I know in UK is different how you handle things and also in United States. So we all do the same, but we have another set of tools to work as a registrar. So you also have to be very open to ask and learn, and why you are saying this and why you are saying that comment, or when you see, it's out of place. But I'm a very straightforward person, and you have to be as a registrar. So, yeah. So, I have no problem at all to accept criticism, but also to let know people they have to be more open also to give us opportunity to all kind. And now here in Puerto Rico, for example, registrars 95% are women. So I'm also in Puerto Rico, so that's also very interesting. I know it's also changing in other places, but here the registrars in the chief registrars in the island are women. So this is also very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's just across the board. I mean, so Jen, what were some of the challenges as you were climbing the ranks that maybe you faced in your career trajectory?
I mean, I think it is that lack of opportunities, isn't it? There are very few. I mean, there aren't that many museums in the world. I mean, we have a lot of them in the UK, but we still, there aren't very many roles for registrars. I think once you've also kind of worked out where you want to live, actually the kind of socioeconomics, let's face it, we don't get paid a huge amount in museums. So actually, in order to move your family or your home, it's really hard for a job. So sometimes it is difficult. So in the UK, it's also around that kind of money gap. So we tried to we set up a registrar training scheme because, as you said, Kaia, it's really difficult to get opportunities and for people to have those kind of internships. So we've been running one with the university here in Leeds and the kind of national museums and the local government museums, so that we have a kind of partnership between kind of academic and kind of practical skills. And we've been running out for 10 years and but paying people to train as a registrar on the job. And we've tried to take people from different backgrounds who aren't necessarily, our kind of aim was at the start was to kind of, well, let's open it up to anybody who wants to find out about this amazing world that we work in museums. And then you find that actually you get applications from people with masters, multiple masters, sometimes with PhDs, because it's such a hard world to get into. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that the lack of opportunity. There just aren't the jobs. And now I really feel sorry for those people who are coming up, because there are even less jobs. And with this current pandemic, you know, I'm seeing, I think the Museums Association is running a kind of who's announced redundancies, and at the moment we're up to over 3,500 redundancies have been announced in the UK in museums, and that's the ones we know about that have hit now, let alone the kind of the implications further down the line. So I think that's been the biggest challenge, is the opportunities, and you know, how do you do that?
You have done the segue for me to our next question, but before we get there, Robin, let's look at the chat. Any comments there? And thank you to everybody who's posting in there. And remember, you can always log into your Gmail account or your Google account and contribute to the chat. So Robin, what's going on in there?
Well, it's been interesting to read the comments that people talk about how their careers started.
Yeah.
I did a purposeful call out to former archaeological techs, historic preservation people, like where I came from. But there are people there's a zookeeper, there were people working for private art collectors, producer for public art and design events in Italy. Someone started their career in computer science, then academic history, then a registrar. So it's sounding like a lot of us, some of us are purposeful, but some of us kind of fell into it a little bit as they kind of found themselves in places where they, like, I always think of it as I still have a passion for history. I just realized I really like things connected to history, and then I really like organizing. So adding all those together to me was kind of what became a registrar.
I mean, one of the questions we're going to have to ask the panel, but I don't want to do it yet, but it's I'm going to say it so I don't forget it. It's like, what keeps you in it? But before we do that, let's talking about the opportunity, and you know, the creation of opportunities right now. You know, of course, you know, as Jen mentioned, there's been mass layoffs, furloughs, and you know, just a real. I mean, it was an issue before the COVID lockdowns, but then as now, of course, it's even worse. And you know, the chatter is that there's a lot of people that are frankly interested in leaving the field you know, not just registrars, just museums in general, because of you know, lack of pay, lack of opportunity, etc. Now, you know, Kaia, in your situation, you are no longer a registrar, and you know, I'm not going to attribute that to, say, lack of opportunity or anything, but I'll give you the chance. Like, what caused you to make that transition away from being a registrar?
Well, to be honest, I don't know if it was so intentional. I think it was more happenstance, and the opportunity presented itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because if I look back, I do remember the head of the museum studies program at Seton Hall University saying to me, she was like, I see you in museum education more so than registration. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, you're just extroverted and this and that. And I was like, no, I'm very much an introvert. I like the idea of, like, you know, autonomy and working closely with objects. But I guess in the end, just in terms of the work that I do now, I think very much I'm still working closely with objects, but it's more in relation to contextualizing them or building a narrative around an object or an exhibition, rather than being like a steward of that object and protecting it. I think for me, the transition really happened. Again, I'm going to go back to this idea of having a network and having mentors and people giving you a heads up when opportunities are there and a position opens up. So what happened with me and how I got into working on public programs was that I was facilitating a few loans with the Embassy of Australia, and they knew me because I was working for this private collection who had lent art to the Embassy of Australia in Washington, D.C., and the manager of the gallery was getting ready to leave. And they're like, oh, this position's open if you know of anyone. I was like, And then someone else within my network in Washington, D.C. said the same thing, like, oh, this position is opening up at the Embassy of Australia. I think you would be great at it. And I was like, well, I'm managing the art gallery. I know I can do that. I know I can hang an exhibition. I know I can take care of the art. What I wasn't sure about is really building programming, cultural programs on Australia. I knew nothing about Australia. It was a huge learning curve, not only working in an embassy setting, but also the fact that, I didn't know much about Australian art. I didn't know much about Australian history. So I basically like learned that on the job in like a crash course. But that's not to say that that should hinder me. I think for me, I was interested in the challenge. I always like to learn and set myself up to be a little uncomfortable so that I do learn. So that essentially was how I kind of got my opportunity to go into that direction in terms of working in programs.
Did you have a mentor that kind of taught you about developing programs?
So yeah, I mean, I think on the job I learned, obviously I had to do some research. I had to learn about contemporary Australian art, but also Aboriginal art. I developed friendships with some of the embassy people who basically kind of held my hand throughout it all. And I think for me, it was very helpful. And then I stayed in that position for a year, and then I went on to work on public programs for the National Portrait Gallery.
Yeah, I love this story where, like, for example, like on paper, you would have been unqualified for that job, but obviously people recognized your capabilities and saw that you were the right person for the gig. And I just feel like, I've talked to so many people and they constantly say, oh, look, I've applied to, 200 jobs and I can't find something, but I feel like I'm perfectly qualified. As you say, it's all about your network.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned your network before in getting to getting into your registrar career. Did that network come from you personally, or did your university, did Howard actually help facilitate that?
Do you mean in terms of
developing the network to give you these as a resource?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely one thing I would say about pursuing advanced education is that it doesn't always pay off, but in a way it does, because that is where you start developing that network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like through your professors, through your peers. And I think in my case of getting my first registrar job, I was finishing up my master's thesis, and I was looking for a job, and on the fly, I applied to an outgoing registrar position at the Museum of the City of New York, and that was where I met my mentor, Ellen Burke. I'll give her a shout out, but she took a chance on me too. To be honest, I mean, I had the theoretical kind of handle on registration, but like, did I necessarily have that hands-on experience? No, I didn't. So,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of learned on the job, and I think, a lot of us do, we
Yeah.
sometimes just have to learn on that job, we study theories, we study art history, but in the end, it's really, you learn so much when you're in that job. So I think for me, that's kind of how it's worked, me being a registrar, but also me working on public programs. It's just kind of like, you're thrown into this situation, you kind of either sink or you swim. So you just need to be afforded that opportunity. And I think that is the important thing. And I also would like to say that skills are transferable, so you might be a registrar working directly with objects, but a lot of those skills you have, it's project management, It's, you adhere to deadlines, and, all of that could be addressed in other positions and other jobs outside the museum field.
Yeah, fantastic advice there. Jen, how did you get involved in armor? I assume that you don't have a background in armor. What prepares you for this sort of position?
That's a very good question. I don't know. Well, there aren't any, there are very few roles in arms and armor. So it's not just armor that we look after, obviously. It's kind of all the kind of firearms and spears and all sorts of, we have an art collection and everything, but I think I've always sort of dealt with those. Some of the items are quite difficult in terms of, or challenging in terms of their legality, especially in the UK, probably more so than perhaps in the US in terms of firearms. We have a huge amount of different kind of controls over our firearms than I think that you guys do. But so I've always sort of dealt with those difficult or more challenging collections. So it's that kind of, I've been working in my previous role to this one, I was working quite closely with Royal Armouries. So I've always been sort of in charge of firearms and that kind of thing. So but again, a bit like Kaia, learning on the job. So I still don't know a huge amount about arms and armour. Which I'm quite happy to admit, but I'm learning all the time. So it's kind of 2 years in and I'm learning a lot more about, bits of armor that I never knew before.
Do you, someone mentioned in the chat about favorite objects. What are, maybe your top 3 objects that you admire or enjoy working with in your collection?
Wow, that's hard. I think to choose like very specific objects. Probably I don't know if you know it, but the kind of, which is the mascot, I guess, the logo that we use at the Leeds museums, which is a kind of, it's a horned helmet. So it's a very cool helmet with big horns and spectacles, and there's even like a drip of snot. So that's quite a cool object. And then things like we have a self-propelled gun, a sexton, which has a kind of 25-pound gun on it, and it's mounted in kind of like a tank. That's quite cool too. And then we have I guess the other thing that is quite to show the kind of broad scope of the collection, we have a painting by Rubens, a portrait by Rubens. So it's a kind of broad range. So that, I guess, would be my favorite objects in the Royal Armouries collections at the moment.
Yeah. Chiquita, talk about your collection. What are some of the challenges that you face? Like, I think you're known around these parts, around the ARCS parts, as the natural disaster expert. But I don't know if we can refer to you.
Good to know.
Yeah, you're famous, infamous, whichever it is. But what are some of the interesting things in your collection, and what are some of the challenges you face on a daily basis?
I know this is very academic and to say, but if you know your collections, what are made of, what the diversity that you have is the best way to take care of, and which I have from hurricanes to earthquakes to Sahara dust, winds that you can see from the street when you stretch your hand. So that happened all in here in 2020. So, and also the pandemic, you have to deal with everything also mentally, and also have control of the collections and all your programs and all your deadlines of the project that you have. But also you have to take care of each collection gonna react differently. So, and also the collection is so diverse in 3D objects and sculpture and art and painting in between their own typologies. So it is a lot to handle. And I'm a wine show woman. And also we are a very small staff, but we all aware of everything the other person do. Mm-hmm. So communication with the other persons in the museum is very important. So when I need it, I have 5 more registers. For example, they know they're aware of what I do, because of that teamwork is very important here. You do something because you know how to handle some things, but when you need it, we all. So I think maybe it's more Latino, Puerto Rican kind of things to treat some things as a family. So we're doing this, we have to do this, and this is what it takes in hand. So that's very important. I admire Jen because she can say what her favorite objects are. For me, it's like picking your favorite child. So I can do that. For some, some are more have to take care more than others, and that part of the. So for in the last 2 years after Hurricane Maria, so I decided to learn more about emergencies. I was dealing more, so that was the line I had to go to learn more, to see what I have to do to prevent more damage, because it was needed at that moment. Mm-hmm. So I handled it, but it wasn't in my forefront always. So from that moment on, or the course I have taken on, so that's the course right now as a registrar. Maybe I'm leaning now because I really love it, mm-hmm. but also I can leave behind the object.
Right.
Because I being in the museum, a university museum, also the impact and the mission of the museum is to also teach and outreach the students, not only for the exhibitions, also for be a mentor.
Yeah.
So right now I have students coming. I'm writing a thesis or a project class about emergency planning. It's like you are in bachelor's now. There's no program who teach that anywhere in BA. So now you have seen another change of pace within the academia, and now they have to reach the professional. So it's very interesting now as a registrar, I can teach back and reach the students. So I did it on purpose, but I'm now working as a mentor, and because it's very important. It happened to me, and really making sure to do it also for others.
Let's go to the questions before we start a final rundown where we look towards the future. Anything in the chat going on, Robin?
One interesting question that popped up earlier, it says, to all panelists, at what point did they feel seen and heard as a museum professional and no longer as they say intern or grad student? I would also add EMP to that list. So when did you kind of feel like you had, I want to say come into our career, because I feel like careers are like a constantly evolving thing, but when did you kind of feel cemented in what you were doing or how you were looking at your career? Or are you just happy?
Maybe there isn't a moment. I don't know. Maybe is it after you get a certain job or at a certain level? Just throwing that out there.
I think it's big. When you pass the 5-year, very steady in a job, so you can plan ahead for 2 to 3 years other program on your projects. So, and you are in charge of it. That was like, oh, okay, now I get it. So that was the key. And also when the museum because I was hired as a registrar for the accreditation, and the museum get the accreditation in 2013. So now I have to comply for everything I did to be a accredited museum. So you have another level of compromise to keep going as a professional, also as a registrar in a museum. So it's very important. So that coming on, I did what I was hired for. Yeah. So that was very important for me.
Yeah. Other comments, Robin? Questions?
I think we're caught up pretty good. There is an interesting point, though, that someone said about, I wonder if you have ever considered working as a registrar in auction houses, commercial art galleries, or for private collectors. Do you prefer museums, or did it just happen to be? And I think that's interesting because I've always worked for either as an institution or as an independent registrar. So I think it's interesting if people kind of set out in their careers to work for the private side of the house, or was it just kind of like where the jobs are, or kind of what is everyone's thoughts on those two different, I guess they're career paths in the grand scheme of things, but where you're going to be working.
I can try to answer that. I think all of those environments, honestly, are all very different. Working in a museum setting is very different than working in a gallery setting or for a private collection. I think museums tend to kind of set the bar, and they move, I think, in a very planned kind of way, whereas maybe when you're working for a private art collector, things might move at a different pace. You're working on behalf of a private collector and their collection, and sometimes things just come up where you have to pivot and move very fast. The same with art galleries. They are in the business of moving art fast. So I would say that all those environments are so different, even though the common thread is the art. That's how I would answer that.
I worked for a private collector for almost 10 years. And as you say, the pace is extremely different. And what's weird about it is that oftentimes there's a very blurry line between personal
Yes.
things and the object or the collection. What is the collection, right?
Yes.
And so it's one of those things where you either love or you hate. You kind of wear every hat, as as people in small institutions do. You have to do a little bit of everything. So you might be in charge of the collection, but sometimes you have to go work on the dishwasher in the house. So we have just a few more minutes left. So I do want to talk about aspirations for the future. Now we've kind of addressed how people got into it, and oftentimes through sort of circumstance and not necessarily intent, but how do you perceive the future of the profession and where it's going, and what are maybe your hopes? And short answers, please. On the big question, short answers. Let's start with you, Jen. No pressure.
That is a big question. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know about anyone else. I mean, I never had a plan. I still don't have a plan of like, this is my career, and in 5 years' time, I'm going to be director of the British Museum. No, there is no plan. I guess I'm just hopeful. I am kind of concerned about the cultural sector at the moment, and when we've taken a massive hit. We were, as you said before, things weren't great before the pandemic hit. Now the pandemic's hit, and especially in the UK, we also have the Brexit word to deal with as well. All of this is going to have a massive impact, and I do really worry for the culture sector in terms of the future. I mean, we have been through really tough times before, but this looks like we have to kind of really think about how we adapt the sector and what we do in museums. If we can't have lots of people, the driver's always been around visitor figures, and that's going to be, we can't do that anymore. So I think it's a really interesting time, and I think we have to adapt and change, and that's what we as registrars do so well is adapt and constantly change.
Very well put. Kaia, thoughts?
I echo Jen's point. I mean, I think we're all kind of figuring out day to day how things are going to go. With the economy, the art sector, with museums closing and now starting to reopen. I think the future very much is unknown, but we still have work to do in maintaining our collections, offering virtual programs online. I also don't have like a set goal right now. I'm quite happy where I am working on public programs and other special projects and initiatives for the National Portrait Gallery. But yeah, we'll see what the future brings.
Chiquita, tell us the
Well,
way.
As a island girl point of view, is the reality is very different here in the island. So because we have another set of things coming as an economic factor, also on top of the pandemic. The thing I wanted to do a year ago is not longer. So you have, as also will say, you have to adapt and rethink what you wanted to do. But I'm really grateful that because the museum is inside the university and the university is a very solid institution still. So I still have my job now. I change pace and I'm doing other things that I want to. So when we open, we have a lot of things to go forward as a museum, as a teamwork. But personally, I still want to teach, be a mentor. I'm doing it without acknowledging that I was doing it. So, and now, because I have two previous students that have been working in the museum where they were doing their bachelors, I'm seeing like we are in the same age, but now they are registers. Now they are taking in because they have that thing, they have that opportunity. So still, I can keep doing that. I'm happy where am I?
Yeah.
And that's very, very important. If I find another line of work like Kaia did, like you can use your other skills, that we happy. But right now, if you're a registrar, I think you're a registrar for life. It's part of, for everything what you do. So
I think what's interesting is, I didn't know anything about any of your careers before we had this conversation today, and that's somewhat by intent. But we do see some common threads where, everyone had either an internship or a mentor type figure that got them into the field. It sounds like nobody applied to their job using a resume or anything like that. It was really, who it's your network and everything. So these are important points because they continue to be relevant now, as we're in this other, if we consider this lockdown as a defining moment, as we look to the future, it's going to be ever more important. I'm not saying, applying for jobs is irrelevant, but, it seems like the network and is how you gain access to so many things. So, and also if you are in a position to be hiring people, look at these people. They're fantastic and they got there because someone took a chance on them. So maybe take a chance on somebody that doesn't have an Ivy League education. They don't all have to come from Harvard. They can come from your internship program. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Any other last questions from the chat that we should address, Robin?
No, just lots of thanks from everyone for participating in this presentation. And they were so glad to hear just kind of the perspectives that we all had to bring today.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jen, Kaia, Chiquita. This has really been a great conversation. To everyone out there listening, thanks for joining us. Also, thanks for joining us on the live chat and participating there. If you are listening, please hit the subscribe button on the YouTube so you can get notified whenever we go live in the future. Remember to join us the first Tuesday of every month for our next chat. The next chat is going to be, is it National Fire?
It is. It's all about fire prevention and how we deal with the wonderful, obviously we've had the LA fires that have been, or the California fires have been handling, but we are also going to have experts on just fire prevention, all that kind of fun stuff we have to deal with. And a quick programming note, we are moving the next chat to November 10th. So just heads up on that. That first
Because
week.
of election day in the United
I was just going to
States.
say, and please remember to register to vote. So if you're in the United States, so that would be a very useful thing right now. But yeah, November 10th, 1 p.m. Eastern, we will bring you that chat.
Yeah, exactly. So, and like I said, it's going to be about fire, but about all the things that we're getting wrong about fires, because needless to say, fires continue to happen. Why is that?
And they can happen anywhere.
We're going to have a real life firefighter on the program. Think about it. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us, and to everybody listening, thanks for joining in, because you're probably at work. Maybe you're procrastinating, and we're happy to facilitate that. So with that, we're going to sign off. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great Tuesday. Bye.